So happy that everyone could join us this afternoon for a program that we're very, very excited about, and to bring to you several topics that we know will appropriately honor what is an incredible milestone in the world of athletics and women in athletics, and that is, of course, the 50th anniversary of Title IX. I just want to start by welcoming everyone, and then I'm going to hand it right over to Rick Everard. Rick is one of my partners here at Schoeneck King, and he has the tremendous pleasure of sharing with you some insights and some remarks from Val Ackerman, who is the commissioner of the Big East Conference and has graciously joined us today while she's in the midst of meetings out in Utah. So thank you, Rick, and we turn it over to you.
Laura, thanks very much. I do have the distinct pleasure and opportunity to introduce Val Ackerman. Val is the current commissioner of the Big East Conference. She was the founding president of the Women's National Basketball Association, the WNBA. She's the past president of USA Basketball, which oversees the U.S. men's and women's Olympic basketball program. And she's one of the few executives in all of sports who has held leadership positions in both men's and women's sports at the collegiate, professional, national team, and international levels. Cool. Val attended the University of Virginia as one of the school's first female student athletes. She was a 4-year starter, a 3-time captain, and 2-time academic All-American for the Cavaliers women's basketball team. And she was the first 1,000-point scorer in the program's history. She played 1 year of professional basketball in France before earning a law degree from UCLA in 1985. Val started her legal career at the New York law firm of Simpson Thacher, and then she joined the National Basketball Association as a staff attorney in 1988. Val was an executive at the NBA for 8 years, serving as a special assistant to former NBA Commissioner David Stern before she was named the WNBA's first president in 1996. Val guided the WNBA to much heralded launch in 1997, and she headed its day-to-day operations for its first 8 seasons. A USA Basketball board member for 23 years, Val played a leading role in the long-standing success of the U.S. women's national basketball team program, which during her term won gold medals in the 1998, 2002, and 2010 International Basketball Federation, FIBA's World Championships. And she also won gold medals in 1996, 2000, 2004, 2008, and 2012 Olympic Games. Val also served 2 terms as the U.S. representative for men's and women's basketball on the Central Board of FIBA. She also served as an at-large member of the U.S. Soccer Federation Board of Directors. In 2019, Val was appointed co-chair of the Ncaa Federal and State Legislation Working Group, which was tasked with examining the Ncaa's rules related to student-athlete name, image, and likeness. The working group's efforts led to a report in 2020 recommending groundbreaking new NIL opportunities. Those are the changes that were implemented 1 year ago. Val currently serves as a member of the board of directors of Women's Leaders in College Sports. She is also on the board of directors of the Women's Basketball Hall of Fame, and she has done consulting work for the National Hockey League regarding formulation of a long-term plan to support women's hockey in our country. And as you can see from the picture on your screen, Val has the world of athletics spinning on the tip of her finger. Val Ackerman, welcome, and thank you so much for participating in the first Bond Title IX webinar.
Great. Thank you so much, Rick. It's great to be here.
So Val, you were there as an athlete in college when Title IX was in its infancy. You've lived through what most will agree to as a slow start for that legislation. You saw the ups and downs of the legislation and its implementation, and you have seen firsthand where our institutions of higher education have accelerated and at times stalled in recognizing this legislation. If you would, please tell us from your perspective whether there has been real progress for women in sports.
Well, Rick, the short answer is unquestionably so. And I like to think I'm living proof of how far the connection between women and sports has come in our society. Thanks for going through my journey. I truly have had, I think, a front row seat on all the changes that have transpired in my lifetime, certainly, but also since Title IX was passed in 1972, that transformative law that opened so many doors for women and girls to play sports, doors that had either been closed or were not very wide open before the law was passed. So I'm in the camp of glass half full on all the changes that have happened. When I think of Title IX, I do think about the participation opportunities that have been opened, but I also think about the other ways, Title IX, the outgrowths, if you will, of ways where Title IX has strengthened, again, that connection between women and sports. If you look at women as spectators at sporting events, if you look at the rise of the elite platforms, like the WNBA, like the National Women's Soccer League, maybe someday there'll be a WNHL. If we look at has gone on at the Olympic level with the number of participants now on Team USA, at least 50% or maybe even more, if I have the data correct from Tokyo and Beijing over the last year. And then you look at the number of women who are serving in leadership positions in the sports business, not just coaches, but also as athletics directors and commissioners and women who are holding executive positions at networks and at sports marketing companies, at national governing bodies, and at the brands that are supporting sports at the corporate level. It's hard not to think that enormous progress hasn't been made. So, I'm here to say 3 cheers for Title IX, and hopefully the next 50 years we'll see more gains still in that connection.
So Val, clearly you have taken advantage of the opportunities that were presented to you as a student athlete. Tell us what you see as the individual benefits that women who have the opportunity to participate in athletics competition can gain.
Well, there are a myriad of benefits, to be sure, Rick. And again, not to over personalize this, but I did live that through my experience as a high school athlete in the mid 70s, growing up in a small town. And then, of course, when I went off to college and was able to earn a scholarship, eventually a full scholarship to play basketball at Virginia, I really lived all the benefits that sports provide to young people. It's truly one of the most effective ways that we can develop character and leadership skills and build lifelong fitness habits. What better way than to get kids involved in sports, and better still to have them be part of teams where the structure and the discipline and the goal setting and the group effort that goes along with being part of a team sort of comes to bear on the experience. So that was my experience. Maybe to make it personal again, at Virginia, I was a pre-law major there. I opted for an interdisciplinary major offered there called political and social thought. It mixed a lot of disciplines, so I didn't really have to pick one. I actually wrote a thesis on the role that sports plays in American society. I sort of posited that sports was a form of a civil religion that brought people together in ways that very few institutions in our culture really can. So I lived the experience of juggling academics and athletics, dealing with adversity. Whenever we lost a game, I took it very hard. I was a 3-time captain, as you noted, and so that sort of thrust me into a leadership position pretty early. Time management was a critical skill, of course, that we all had to master. And I guess I would just say all those skills, affect me today. I mean, they all come to bear every single day I go to work. I think those skills are timeless. And I think of note, I don't have the data at my fingertips here, but I know surveys and studies have been done that have looked at the backgrounds of women in C-suite type roles in our society. And it turns out that many of them had some experience with organized sports when they were young girls and young women, and they were sort of coming up the ladder. So again, I think that correlation is very real. And I do think society as a whole has benefited from this because, as we know, women aren't just staying in sports after they play sports like I've done, but women are going on and doing important things with their lives. They're being lawyers in firms like yours. They're working for corporate America. They're working in government. They're working in higher ed. They're working in science and you name it. And I think I would venture to say that sports probably had some role to play in the success of all these women many years later.
Yeah. So Val, our audience today is a large and wide group. We have general counsels, we have athletic administrators, we have some coaches, we have lawyers. What barriers still exist to providing opportunities for women? And what can the audience do to assist with breaking down those barriers, in your judgment?
Well, I think, Rick, for one, there will never not be a need for advocacy. And I laud organizations like the Women's Sports Foundation and the National Women's Law Center, among others, who have really made it their daily work to talk about the importance of sports opportunities for girls and women, to provide, in the case of the WSF, grant money to girls who are underserved and who don't have the kinds of opportunities available to them that girls in, for example, affluent suburbs might have, and reminding everybody that there are still gaps between the vision of Title IX, that vision that Birch Bayh and Patsy Mink had 50 years ago, and what we sometimes see on the ground. And so I think the advocacy piece is important. I think parents play an important role here in terms of nurturing the sports dreams of their young daughters. That was certainly the case with me. My dad was a high school athletics director, and we had no sports in my organized sports for girls in my hometown. So it was my dad that was really my ticket, and was the one that threw the baseball and the football, and we played badminton and shot baskets in the driveway. That's how it happened. And so I think anybody on the call who's a parent should be as supportive of the sports aspirations of your daughters as you might be for your son. And I hope as supportive as my dad was for me. I also, think funding probably comes to bear, Rick, on many of the opportunities that could present themselves for young women. And the good news is Title IX is a mandate. I mean, that's the law, that if you're a federally funded educational institution, you have to find a way to make these opportunities available. So I think those of you on the front lines, I think this law is in your good hands. We're really counting on our ADs especially to figure out how the different pieces of Title IX fit together, to make sure you understand the law, to make sure that, if you have to be inventive about finding the resources to make sure the mandate is satisfied, you find a way to do it, and that you are, looking for counsel if you're finding challenges in that area. I'm going to confess here, I'm not a Title IX technician or a practitioner. I'm not on the front lines of Title IX administration. I know it's a very nuanced law, and there are probably things about it that may not be visible to the naked eye in terms of how compliance is to be managed. And that's where I think the good lawyers come in here, Rick, the people who really are artful about how the law is supposed to apply, and are finding ways to make sure that, again, the spirit and the letter of the law are satisfied, and good counsel is being sought if there are questions about that. The last thing that I will say, Rick, and I do think this is important, I hope that everyone will give credit where credit is due, because as I said at the top, I think there's sometimes criticism about the work that hasn't been done, or the occasional mishaps, as I would call them, some more serious than others. But I don't think that should obscure the fact that there has been a lot of progress made here, and the people that are making these opportunities available, and giving young women especially the benefit of the educational element of sports, that their work is being credited.
Val, that's great advice. I'm going to summarize by saying 3 points I think that you made. Number one, get involved, get people involved, and get behind these programs that do support women's programs. The second one was funding, I think. I think we know that from every aspect of life. You have to have some sort of funding in order to make things grow. And I couldn't agree with you more on those points. The third one, I think that you just said, is we have to recognize there's been progress, and that's a great thing. There has been progress, but we still need a little bit more. We got to always push. Val, just over a month ago, we saw the U.S. women's and men's soccer teams announcing through a collaborative, although two separate collective bargaining agreements, that they're going to be paid equally. How can we use this message, this wonderful news as a platform to build upon so that we can benefit other women's sports programs?
Well, I'll use the word extraordinary on this one, Rick. It really was, that was a wow.
Yeah.
For me. I'll share, I spent a couple of years on the board of US Soccer as an independent director, and so was privy, I haven't been for a few years, but was privy at that time to conversations that were going on, and they've been going on for a while within the federation, about the incredible success of the women's national team in soccer, and how to make sure that the accomplishments of those athletes were recognized in terms of their economic relationship with the NGB. And so I'd sort of lost track of things other than through what I read in the papers. But to see that happen was, I think, a reflection of great leadership by USSF, sort of persistence by the athletes. And again, I want to you have to credit them, because they really, in many ways, have helped put soccer on the map in this country. And it's wonderful to see that contribution to the sport being recognized in this way. And number three, I want to laud the men's soccer national team program, because as I understand it, they, in effect, were taking money that would be coming to them from the International Federation, FIFA, in the form of bonus payments, in effect saying, hey, while that money for us is more than what FIFA would pay to the women based on their performance, we're going to share that. And so that collaborative spirit by the men's team, to me, spoke volumes. And kind of got me thinking about what you often hear in women's sports advocacy circles, is this notion of allyship. The idea that while the women, are the recipients of the support, and need to make their voices heard and need to be advocates for themselves, the fact remains that in many quarters, decision-making is still in the hands of men. I mean, that's certainly been my experience in the sports world over 30 plus years. I mean, men are still the majority party, if you will, in the sports business. And so it's critically important to me that men, are getting on board and being part of the journey here with us. I have a real life example in terms of what David Stern, my old boss at the NBA, did to advance the cause of women's basketball by, in effect, greenlighting. Got support from the NBA owners to do it, but he was the green light that made the WNBA possible. And so I would sort of say to any of our male colleagues, you included, Rick, who are on the line today, we want and need your support, and we want you to see this as a positive for everybody. If women advance in sports, the whole industry advances. And so this is a classic case to me of a group effort in order to make those good things happen.
Again, Val, great suggestions and great words, and I couldn't agree with you more. The more collaboration, the more integration, the better we all become, and that truly has to carry, particularly to our athletic administrators on campuses all across the country. So Val, social media, I want to interject a little bit about social media real quick. I'm recalling a couple of years ago in the Ncaa basketball tournament, student athletes Instagram post comparing the difference between the strength and conditioning equipment provided to the men versus the women. With that example in mind, and it's just one of probably hundreds, what aspects of athletics have not progressed as they should, and how can we address them as a society, and particularly, again, to your audience here today?
That example, Rick, which was just a year ago. It was in the NCAA women's basketball tournament of 2021.
Right.
So that was a COVID impacted event that was played on both the men's and women's sides as bubbles respectively. So all the men's teams were in Indianapolis, and all the women's teams traveled to San Antonio, Texas for the women's championship, all in one, a single event. And it was very, very unfortunate what was revealed through, you're right, a social media posting by one of the athletes that had to do with the inadequacy of the weight room facilities, right, on the women's side. So I think, yes, to your point, a couple of lessons come out of that. One is the power of social media, the power of athletes and their social media platforms in order to get messages across and images across that might otherwise be not visible. So we learned a lot there about the dangers of I'll call them mishaps. They may have been able to stay secret in the old days, but that's not the case anymore. I do think that issue of facilities is, answer one on your question is just making sure as best we can that there are comparable facilities for men's and women's athletes at the high school and collegiate level, where Title IX is the law, so that the experiences of the athletes are comparable, are equitable, are fair.
Yeah.
I think that's sort of number one. If you're asking me what other work remains to be done, I'll just put on the top of my list this leadership point that I made earlier. I mean, I'm heartened because more women, people like myself, have had an opportunity to work in sports, to advance in sports, to be decision makers in the sports business. But, I still go to a lot of meetings where there aren't many women in the room. There aren't many people of color in the room. I don't feel often like the LGBTQ community is represented in robust ways at decision-making tables. If you travel internationally, I will tell you, because I've done that, it's worse. I spent, as you noted, 8 years on the board of the International Basketball Federation, and they're behind us. They don't have Title IXs in the countries that were at the table in those rooms that I was party to. And I've often said we need a Title IX for the world, so that other women in other places have the benefit, the force of federal law, to make opportunities available for them that were available to women here. So I would say the leadership piece, Rick, would be also near the top of my list in terms of areas that it would be great to see continuing progress in the coming years.
Val, I'm jumping all around and I'm really taxing your mind because I know you're in meetings, but there's so much to cover as it relates to student athlete health and well-being. And mental health problems with college athletes has been a long time problem, but it seems to be becoming more socially prevalent. People are hearing more about it. Can you just comment briefly on what you are seeing from your chair and what you consider to be some possible solutions?
Well, coincidentally, Rick, we just hosted last week, our conference that is, a student athlete well-being forum involving all of the schools in the Big East. We had a mix of doctors, trainers, athletics directors, administrators, campus counseling representatives, and importantly, student athletes who were there, just, exchanging notes about, as you noted, this environment we're now in, where student athletes are dealing not only with the usual stresses of trying to juggle the demands of school and sports and dealing with failure when it happens and trying to have social lives and dealing with the pressures of being, Instagram sensations on social media and everything that comes with that, including NIL, but also dealing with a rebound from COVID, where many student athletes had to isolate themselves. They weren't able to be as social as we know, people in that age bracket are. And so really, in many ways, are still readjusting socially. And so we had a really good session on that last week. We had some really powerful speakers. And so the answer to your question is, I think on campuses and in conference offices, we have to be really attentive to the needs of our athletes. I look at someone like me. I'm not on the front lines of mental health because I'm not on a campus, but I see it as my job to bring concerns to the presidents of our schools, because I know they're the ones that are going to have to connect the dots in their heads and figure out how to combine this effort to destigmatize mental health, which we're all doing. We're telling athletes, come forward if you have a problem. Don't keep it to yourself. We want to help you. If they do that, if they take us up on that and they come forward, then we have to make sure there are services available to help them. And that's where I think we're maybe still seeing a disconnect on our campuses. Come forward and we're going to help you. We're going to have the resources to do that. So I think right now, Rick, that's probably the number one concern that I'm seeing is identification, having the services available, and then importantly, making sure coaches who are really on the front lines here, making sure they have the tools that they need in order to identify not just a bad day. We all have bad days. Yeah. But to know when a really bad things are happening and when really serious problems are hitting one of their charges, and then figuring out, how to handle it or hand it off to somebody who's qualified to do that if they're unable to do it themselves.
Val, we only have a few more minutes here, and so I'm going to just hit you and ask you to give me your first thoughts as I ask you these questions. Where is Val Ackerman today, if not for Title IX?
I probably would have played sports anyway.
Unknown caller.
Even, if I wasn't able to be on a team, that's how much I was into athletic activity. But I don't know. I'm sure I wouldn't be sitting here today talking to you. Maybe I would have gone to law school anyway. Might have been working for a firm. Probably would have, done okay by myself, but I would not have had the life journey or certainly the professional journey that Title IX has made possible for me.
Yeah. College athletics is in somewhat of a turbulent time, some would say. I think turbulence might just be, bumps
an understatement.
And even from our practice standpoint, we go on campuses and see all of the problems that exist within an athletics program. Top two issues that you think need to be addressed, prioritize them. What's the first one and what's the second one that has to be addressed by college sports?
Well, the near-term one is just, reconciling the relationship between the national offices, the conferences, and the schools. And that's underway through the work of the Transformation Committee, which is conducting a comprehensive review of various D1 membership matters. And included within that, I think, might be some reimagination of what the NCAA is as a national governing body. This inquiry was, as you know, very much fueled by the Alston decision last year, and is really looking hard at the regulatory authority of a national governing body in college sports. What is that? What should it be? So I think that's a top of mind issue for many of us in college sports. And then number two, I think it's hard to ignore the continuing challenges to the collegiate model and the reconciliation of the antitrust laws with the employment laws and Title IX, and how all those pieces are going to fit together and create a model with some certainty around it, not with the uncertainty that we have today, but a model that not only works for the athletes and is fair to them, but also maintains all of the things that have made college sports special and unique in our society over many, many decades. And so whether that can be done internally at the NCAA, where we can come up with a model that satisfies all of that, or whether there needs to be some sort of a federal intervention to make sure that's the case. I wish I don't have the crystal ball to answer that question, but I think those two things would probably be top of mind for me, Rick, on the question you asked.
Last question, Val, and before I say goodbye, I can't tell you how much we appreciate your participation here, but if we could grant one wish, what would you wish for in college sports?
I would really hate, Rick, to lose the best parts of college sports. The rivalries, the educational value of athletics for young people has to remain at the forefront of our minds as practitioners. It's education for heaven's sake. Yes, there are some very extraordinary commercial outcomes at the very highest levels of college athletics, but that's a tiny piece of the overall pie here. And so I just hope we can keep all of the things which have made college sports special, intact as we all look ahead to the future. And I know, speaking on behalf of my commissioner colleagues who I'm with today, that would be the wish of all of us.
Val Ackerman, thank you so very much. Really appreciate it. I'm going to turn it back over to Laura now.
Thanks for having me, Rick.
Thanks.
There. Tempting to unmute myself and took me a couple of tries. So thank you so much, Val, for your time. Those insights are just incredibly valuable. Not many of us get to see sports the way that you see sports. They don't get to see that level of competition the way that you've been able to see it, or to understand those inner workings. It meant a lot to me. I'm sure it meant a lot to everyone else who had the chance to listen. So thank you so much for sharing your time. And I know you've got other very important things to run off to. So please feel free whenever you need to leave to do that. And thank you, Rick. Rick, for those on the call who don't know, chairs our collegiate sports practice, and he has, along with his team, made a real impact on various levels at the NCAA, and doing wonderful work representing clients. And we really appreciate you being here today, Rick, and and sharing your thoughts and sharing your excitement. As Val mentioned, it's important that we have strong male leaders who also appreciate the incredible impact that women's sports have. So thank you so much for all you do for our clients, and then for us here today.
Thanks, Laura.
Our next segment is going to be brought to us by Monica Barrett and Sarah Luke. Monica and Sarah are two of our preeminent leaders in our higher education practice. They both came to Bond after having career time as in-house counsel. So they have kind of seen it all, a lot of these issues from a lot of different angles, in-house and out-house counsel, right? As I think we might occasionally be referred to, perhaps aptly. And Monica and Sarah are going to take us through some of the most current issues around NCAA compliance, Title IX compliance, the way these things dovetail all at this, particularly unique moment in history where we're looking back at an incredibly important law after 50 years.
Thanks a lot, Laura. And I'm Monica Barrett. It's a pleasure to be here. And I wanted to just say briefly how inspiring Val Ackerman, her speech was. And I'm here not as a former student athlete. I haven't been a student athlete since middle school, but I was actually very pleased to hear Val say that Title IX is important for spectators. And I was a spectator for Rutgers women's basketball for 19 years. I had second row seats right behind the team. And Vivian Stringer is just about to retire as coach, but she's an incredible force in the women's basketball arena. And also I had season's tickets to the New York Liberty in their inaugural season back in 1996. And they played at Madison Square Garden, and now they play the New York Liberty, the women's basketball WNBA team in New York City, plays in Brooklyn at the Barclays Center, which is about a mile from where I live and from where Sarah Luke lives. And we've both been to games at the Barclays Center to see the New York Liberty, and it is incredible. The diversity of the audience is amazing. And it's so fun to be in an audience watching women's professional basketball and have girls in the arena just cheering them on, and they're back every week for these games. So it's tremendous how much Val Ackerman has done, how much Chris Thorsten has done to promote women's sports. So what Sarah and I are here to do is we're going to go through a bit of a rapid fire run through gender equity in athletics under both Title IX and NCAA. So Kathy, next slide, please. So the basics. First of all, statutory language about Title IX is pretty straightforward. This is the meat of the language. No person in the US shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subject to discrimination under any educational program or activity receiving federal funds. The implementing regulations for Title IX are in the Code of Federal Regulations. That has the force of law. And where it gets more detailed is when you look at federal agency policy documents that cover Title IX specifically in athletics. And we put the website on this page. And if you go to this website, type in athletics in the search box, and you will find all of the policy documents related to Title IX with gender equity in athletics. And just to give an example, the 1996 clarification from OCR on intercollegiate athletics, and that's the policy document that explains in detail what is known as the three-part test. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. And then additional policy documents are found in that page. And that's OCR, the actual web page is is full of information, important information, including resolution agreements regarding Title IX, gender equity in athletics in Title IX, and letter of findings from OCR. So there's a wealth of information on that website. Next slide, please, Kathy. And just briefly, the NCAA, of course, is not bound by Title IX because they don't receive federal funds, and but they do have a commitment to gender equity in athletics, and they've published a piece in 2016 specifically related to gender equity and Title IX. And I'm glad Rick and Val discussed what happened last spring at the Women's National Basketball Tournament. And I'm going to ask Kathy if you can play it for us.
I got something to show y'all. So for the NCAA March Madness, the biggest tournament in college basketball for women, this is our weight room. Let me show y'all the men's weight room. Now, when pictures of our weight room got released versus the men's, the NCAA came out with a statement saying that it wasn't money, it was space that was a problem. Let me show y'all something else. Here's our practice court, right? And then here's that weight room. And then here's all this extra space. If you aren't upset about this problem, then you're a part of it.
So I'm sure many of you saw that when it came out last year, because it literally, I mean, the word viral probably doesn't capture how far that went around the world, but Sedona Prince is the athlete from University of Oregon who, that was her on the Instagram or the Twitter feed. And she published that right away. And the NCAA had an immediate reaction. U.S. Congress had an immediate reaction. Mikey Sherrill is a U.S. Congressperson from New Jersey. She led a team of Congresspeople who signed a letter to the NCAA back in March 21 that they must correct the inequity that was demonstrated by that athlete Sedona Prince's Instagram post or Twitter post. The NCAA did hire a law firm to do an investigation of all of the NCAA opportunities, and they have responded. So it's important to know that the NCAA has responded. Some people may not think it's enough, including Mickey Sherrill, the Congresswoman from New Jersey, but that's what Val was talking about. There are advocates, the student athletes themselves are advocates. Congress is an advocate for equity in women's sports, and we all can be advocates for it. Another thing that the NCAA has put out, and this was back in 2011, they put out a document titled Inclusion of Transgender Student Athletes. And I'm not going to go into that because Sarah's going to address that later, but the NCAA is in the forefront sometimes in many different areas, and I believe they're going to continue with their commitment and demonstrating their commitment to women athletes. Next slide, please, Kathy. So Sarah and I have just under 30 minutes, probably about 20 minutes, and what we'll cover, Sarah's going to go through sexual harassment prevention under Title IX in both NCAA. I'm going to do a deep dive into when the U.S. Department of Ed comes knocking at your door. Then I'm going to switch it back to Sarah to cover the transgender student participation in athletics. And I'll close it out with a couple of comments on some OCR decisions and case law. So I'll turn it over to my colleague, Sarah Luke.
Thank you, Monica. And Kathy, if you can switch to the next slide, perfect. So as Monica mentioned, and as many of you are probably familiar, one of the things that Title IX has really done in terms of improving the student experience in higher education is it's brought to light the importance of sexual harassment prevention programs. And in fact, many of you probably can identify the Title IX coordinator at your school. Some of you have probably had experience either in the investigation process or the due process hearings that follow. As Monica mentioned, the NCAA is not subject to Title IX, but has issued its own regulations that really support the goals of sexual harassment prevention. And because it's a self-governing association, these are really important to keep in mind, that not only are our institutions bound to comply with Title IX regulations, but also the requirements of the NCAA. One of the ones that we wanted to highlight today, just because it's kind of like the newest one to be aware of, is what I would think of as a due diligence requirement. So in May of 2020, the Board of Governors of the NCAA voted to expand the scope of its campus sexual violence policy to require incoming, current, and transfer college athletes to annually disclose to their school whether their conduct has resulted in an investigation, discipline through a Title IX proceeding, or a criminal conviction for sexual, interpersonal, or other acts of violence. So again, this is a due diligence requirement to try to make sure that our students are safe. A failure by the athlete to accurately and fully disclose investigatory activity, a disciplinary action, or criminal conviction may result in penalties, including the loss of athletics eligibility as determined by the school. So what do schools have to do in light of this new requirement for student athletes? Well, we have to take reasonable steps to confirm the information provided by the prospective student or continuing student athlete, transfer student athlete, and to provide it to other member schools. So you have to cooperate with other schools in their due diligence. If a student athlete attempts to enroll at a different college or university. So as I mentioned, this was announced in May 2020. It's effective now. So if it has not been on your radar, it should be on your radar now. If we can go to the next slide. So member schools should have policies in place to gather this type of information, related information from former schools attended by recruited prospects or transfer student athletes. So we've outlined a couple of approaches to compliance. First, you're going to want to make sure that you have a student athlete disclosure form that you can use annually to collect information. You want to make sure that it's not just when the student athlete starts at the school, but that it will capture student athletes that transfer to your school, that it will be a continuing disclosure, so it's issued every year. And you want to have this information on record, because remember, you're going to have to share it with other institutions potentially. In connection with adoption of such a disclosure form, you also want to ensure that you verify the reported information and follow up on any reports in a reasonable manner. So if a student says that they disclose that they have had an issue at another institution, you want to make sure that that isn't just kept in a file, but that you follow up appropriately, because remember, the underlying concern is safety. Maybe you already have a form like this, and that's great. But if you do, you want to make sure that it's asking for the right information and that it includes appropriate FERPA-related waivers that would allow for the sharing of information. You might want to consider adopting a policy that outlines the reasonable steps your institution will take to confirm whether the information disclosed is accurate. So there are things in terms of confirming the accuracy of the information. There are things that you have to do, and there are things that you might want to consider doing. So the first thing that you'll have to do, especially with an incoming or transferring student athlete, you'll have to contact their previous institution before enrollment to determine whether they have anything that they should be disclosing to you. In addition to that, given the the way that students communicate these days and just the reality of online communication, we recommend, although the NCAA doesn't specifically say this, we recommend as part of your due diligence that you Google the student and potentially engage in social media searches just to see, because the worst thing that could happen is you don't do that, and then it ends up that all of the other student athletes know about an incident that really probably just one or two searches could have shown. So those are things to consider with respect to compliance with the NCAA sexual harassment prevention requirements. And I'll turn it over to Monica to talk about gender equity in athletics.
Thanks a lot, Sarah. And so here is the deep dive into what do you do when OCR comes knocking at your door. So what types of situations will there be when OCR is going to do an investigation? So I've been involved in several different situations that are listed here. A student might file a complaint. For example, if the underrepresented gender is female on your campus, and this happened in one instance I was involved with. Women swimmers realized that they had to go to practice on Saturdays, 2 hours in the pool from 8 a.m. until 10 a.m. The dining hall didn't open until 11:30 because it was a Sunday, and they started serving brunch. And the women on the swim team realized that they had no food for an hour and a half until after they got out of the pool. They filed a complaint with Office for Civil Rights and pointed out that the football team basically had a buffet table almost all day long while they were at practice. So this is the kind of thing, if you don't pay attention to what's going on your campus, that kind of complaint could happen. Whereas if you knew about the disparity and how women athletes were treated from the men athletes, you could address it much more quickly. So in that complaint was filed, and it ultimately ended up being a very large investigation of the overall compliance review of the university. So students can file complaints. Coaches of women's teams may file complaints claiming that there is inequity because their student athletes are impacted negatively by the distribution of facilities at the school. And parents can file complaints with OCR about what's going on at the school. Often OCR will undertake an investigation because there's bad publicity or lots of publicity. It may not be bad, but if a university cuts a number of sports, whether they're men's sports or women's sports, that could result in an OCR investigation. Several universities who have cut men's sports have ended up with a Title IX problem because the result was an inequity in the number of women athletes who were possibly impacted by bad locker rooms, poor quality locker rooms, or moldy locker rooms. When there was a men's team that was a counterpart, for example, in swimming, if there was a men's team and a women's team, you sort of had equal opportunity, poor quality locker rooms. So men and women were equally disadvantaged. But once you get rid of a men's team, then there may be a gender equity problem because more women athletes are impacted by poor locker rooms because you've taken away the male comparators. So lots of different steps that an athletics department takes can result in an OCR complaint. What OCR does when they do an investigation, basically they write directly to your president and they will send a complaint. It's often the student's name is redacted. OCR will send the complaint to the president, and it will have a very lengthy request for information. So you get a notice of investigation, you get a data and information request. OCR may come on campus to do interviews. Often OCR permits lawyers from the counsel's office to be present, or outside lawyers to be present during interviews. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they will say, we will ask the head coaches if they want you to be present during the interview. If the head coach says, no, I'd rather do this alone, OCR will cede to the request of the on-campus head coach and won't allow lawyers in the interview room. So then OCR could also inspect all of the facilities, all of the equipment, take measurements of coaches' offices. They will often do that in a compliance review. Next slide, please, Kathy. And I'm just going to run through, many of you on the call probably are familiar with the tests that OCR goes through in terms of one of the most important tests is the accommodation of interests and abilities. And that's OCR refers to the assessment of that test as a three-part test. The first part is proportionality, where the number of undergraduate students, the ratio between male and female students, is equivalent to the ratio of athletic opportunities on the campus between male and female students. And then the other parts of the test, I won't go through them now, but they are basically for if you can't meet the proportionality tests, the other tests are available to your campuses. I want to jump forward quickly to basically the last bullet here is what's known as the laundry list in Title IX in an equity analysis by OCR. OCR, when they're doing a compliance review, will look at every single factor listed there. And there's about 11 different components to an OCR review. And they will look at, for example, the equipment and supplies for baseball, and they'll compare what you have to other teams, for men's teams and for women's teams. It doesn't necessarily have to be a one-on-one comparison. For example, baseball equipment to softball equipment. The OCR permits you to have variable equipment comparisons if you make up for a shortfall in another area of one of these laundry list items. It's in a way, it's a complex analysis. In another way, it's fairly straightforward. So if you're very familiar with this, it's easy. But I mean, for those of you who have never been involved in an OCR review, whether it by a complaint or a compliance review, it's a little bit daunting, but they take quite a bit of time. But it's OCR investigators are very good at what they do, and they are very communicative with those on the campus when one of these investigations is going on. Next slide, please. I'm just gonna the quick takeaways for OCR investigation when they're examining athletics. Very important for the college or university to get out front and gather information and put your narrative story forward. If you had a cut in a particular sport and there's a basis for it that you could explain why it happened, it's very important to put that out there to OCR and not just respond to their information requests. Don't just give the straight data. Give the university or college's story about what happened on the campus. OCR investigators are human. They will take your phone calls. They will give you information about where they're heading in their investigation, and you will have the opportunity to feed OCR investigators with additional information if you believe they may come to what you think is the wrong conclusion. So it's very important to have ongoing relationship communication with the OCR investigators while they're on your campus. And I just want to finally say, I'm just going to jump forward to surveys of student athletes. When I've been involved in these investigations, when I've counseled clients on resolution agreements, OCR is always looking for, how did you survey the students to assess their interests and abilities? It is a key point. If you take away nothing else, please do surveys of incoming students to find out their interests and abilities. Survey the current students when you can. Having that information is you're going to be requested by OCR for that information and how you responded to the surveys. So that's a very important item to keep on your list. I'm going to turn it back to Sarah to talk about transgender student athletes.
Great, thank you, Monica. So transgender student athletes, when you're thinking about equity, gender equity in athletics, don't forget transgender student athletes. As of last year, the U.S. Department of Education Office for Civil Rights clarified in response to the Bostock Supreme Court decision, which made clear that Title VII's protections extend to transgender individuals and individuals who are discriminated against based on their sexual orientation. Those same protections apply to students under Title IX. So please keep that in mind, and we'll go to the next slide. And so the NCAA in some ways was ahead of its time because it had already contemplated protection or equal treatment for transgender student athletes. In 2011, it adopted a policy that clarified kind of, I guess, how you include transgender student athletes within athletics. And they had a blanket rule of 1 year of testosterone suppression would be enough to allow an individual to play on a women's team. And there were equal treatment requirements in that policy. Things like anti-harassment protections, recognition of preferred names and pronouns, and use of locker room and restroom facilities. So this has shifted very recently. The shift in policy allows for deference to the governing bodies of particular sports. And a lot of advocates have expressed concern about this because there's some ambiguity now. It's not all sports actually have their own policy. The equal treatment requirements remain, but there is sort of this ambiguity now that we're going sport by sport. So my advice is you don't want to be surprised because there isn't sort of this upfront clarity. If as people that work in athletics, if you know needs of particular student athletes, and you need to kind of sort this out, it's better to do it as early as possible so that you don't end up with controversy after the student athletes have all, worked together and built their team and probably won some games. And the worst thing to do is to kind of be surprised on issues like this. This is an area, because a lot of advocates are really interested in it, that is getting a lot of attention. And so please stay tuned. We will try to keep you updated if there are any changes in this area. And I'll turn it back to Monica.
Thanks. And next slide, please, Kathy. I'm going to just briefly talk about the Rutgers compliance review, which is on the OCR. The letter of finding is on OCR's website, and the resolution agreement is there as well. I think if you're looking to learn Title IX very quickly, it is well worth it to read OCR's letter of findings. because that agency is very good at explaining the law and how they're actually applying it to institutions when they do an athletics review. I was involved when Sarah and I were at Rutgers in-house. OCR did a compliance review that lasted 8.5 years. And I got to be very close friends with the investigators at OCR. And that was a situation where the Rutgers had cut 5 men's sports and 1 women's sport. And there was a lot of press about it. And OCR decided to do a compliance review. They usually do a handful of major compliance reviews of any university or college across the country. And Rutgers was tagged that time. They started the review in 2008. They finished it in 2015. And the letter of findings is 50 pages long. And I just wanted to read 2 sentences from it. And mind you, if you remember the laundry list and all the factors that apply to a compliance review, 1 sentence in the beginning of the 3rd paragraph. During the course of the investigation, OCR determined that the university was out of compliance relative to the following components of the intercollegiate athletics program: travel and per diem allowances, locker room, practice and competitive facilities, and support services. So it was those 4 compared to all the rest. And basically OCR found Rutgers in compliance on proportionality and in all of the other laundry list items. And that other finding came later in the letter, where it basically said OCR found insufficient evidence of a violation of Title IX regarding all the other factors. So it's if OCR is going to be on your campus for that long, there's usually going to be some finding of a violation. But as Val Ackerman said, it is important for OCR to be doing this advocacy work. And I want to cite to one last, the case law Degweed versus SUNY at Albany. And that's a very recent case. And that's where Albany had cut the women's tennis team. And the reason the university cut the team was because of the lack of available competition in the conference that SUNY Albany was in at the time. A lot of other schools had cut tennis completely from their program, and SUNY Albany did not have a men's tennis team. So there was an OCR complaint filed. OCR did an investigation. SUNY Albany entered into a resolution agreement that did not require them to reinstate women's tennis, but they agreed to work harder in their proportionality test in offering other opportunities, other athletic opportunities for women athletes that did not include women's tennis. There was a lawsuit filed that included the coach of the women's tennis team, the male coach, and he filed a suit along with the former players on the women's tennis team, and the court dismissed that, granted summary judgment in favor of SUNY Albany, recognizing that the university had already entered into a resolution agreement with OCR. So that was a big success for SUNY Albany. And I'm going to end right there because I don't want to cut into time with Laura and Chris Thorsness.
Thank you so much, Monica. Thank you, Sarah. Always great to have kind of the up-to-date knowledge of what's going on in our regulatory environment. It is my great pleasure to introduce my friend and someone that I have worked with in the past on a couple of cases, Chris Thorsness. Chris is originally from Alaska. She is a 1984 gold medal winner Her team was the rowing team in the 1984 Olympics. That was the first women's team to ever win Olympic gold. And in fact, Chris is the only person from Alaska to have won, or the first person from Alaska to have won any medal at all in the Olympics. She's just an amazing woman. I don't know that I have met anyone quite as accomplished and unique as Chris. She's been inducted into the 1984 Olympic into the Hall of Fame, along with all of her 1984 rowing Olympic teammates. She has not stopped being involved in sports to kind of demonstrate the level of recognition, international recognition that she has as an athlete and as a professional. She is currently an arbitrator for the Court of Arbitration for Sport, which adjudicates doping and other sports-related disputes worldwide. This is an international body. She also sits on the Trials and Games Administrative Boards for the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee. She's served on the board of directors for U.S. Rowing, and she has co-chaired task forces for the new U.S. national rowing team performance at the Rio Olympics. I'd like to take us back in time for a minute with a short video clip before we start talking with Chris Thorsness.
It's a visually striking sport. Oars going in together, oars coming out together. Perfect unison. This is going to be a very close race between Romania and the United States. Romania in the blue. They're in the number 2 lane. America in the number 5 lane. They're almost in a dead heat as they're approaching that finish line. The United States will have to put it on now. They've moved ahead a couple, 3 feet. The United States going for the finish. Now lengthen their lead to about a yard and a half. Going out a little bit farther for the gold medal in the 8s. The United States takes a bigger lead for the finish line. Romania second. A 2-boat race for the gold medal. The United States, look at them go, pouring that power on.
That's a great race. They had to dig down deep. Here they are driving to the line.
And
there they are.
They win the gold medal. The United States 8th. Romania second. And across the way, it appears to be Holland for the bronze. Bob Roots being congratulated. A gold medal. So Romania did not sweep the finals of the women. They won 5 of the 6 gold medals. Officially utter exhaustion.
Just hurt. The turning point in that race was with 200 meters to go. The Romanians had a slight lead or were driving. At that point, the American crew dug down deep and responded.
Look at this finish. United States, a couple of yards over a very game Romanian crew.
And there she is, the woman who was laying down in the boat.
I was tired.
in complete exhaustion. So there was the very first women's Olympic gold in rowing. So take us there, Chris, because none of the rest of us are going to get close. We're never going to experience what that is. Tell us what's going through your mind at a moment like that.
Well, as you might expect, it was one of those peak life experiences. A tremendous amount of work led up to that, and a lot of support from my family and my coaches, my teammates. I was something of a youngster in this crew. So I was, I was surrounded by absolute goddesses of my sport. And it was such an honor to race with them and to get to share this experience with them. And being at home, if you will, in the United States was additionally special, because when we went up to get our medals and looked up into the grandstands, there were a lot of people there you knew. My family was there. My brother, who had first suggested that I try rowing as a sport, was there. So it was wonderfully special in so many ways. There was a lot of disbelief. I really couldn't believe that it was happening to me. I am small for a rower, and had been told pretty much all my career that I was really too small to do anything. And but I just kept showing up and doing the work. And and one thing led to another, and my wildest dreams came true.
So Chris, you were 24, right? 24 at the time that you won that Olympic gold. And what I find so amazing is that you didn't start rowing until college. Is that right?
That's correct. And rowing is one of the few sports that you can still walk on at the collegiate level. There's certainly a lot more high school and junior level rowing across the United States than there was when I first started. When it was largely just sort of a prep school Northeastern thing at the high school level. But you can still walk on, and I did, and a lot of my teammates did. And it was one of the wonderful things about that sport, that it enabled me to pick it up at the collegiate level and compete at a high level in a Division I program right off the bat.
You know, you've spent a lot of time, we talk a lot, right? We just had lunch together, and one of the things that you were telling me about that I just think is fascinating, because we don't understand the commitment, right? For those of us who don't do it, will never compete at this level, don't have that drive, that talent, right? Tell us what your regimen was, from kind of, what you would be eating for breakfast, the number of those calories, and the amount of time that you were at every single day, 6 days a week. Because you're a slacker, not the one.
Yeah, well,
7th day a week.
We essentially train 6 days a week, twice a day. We did a lot of work. I look back at some of my old training journals, and I'm just astounded at the volume of work that we used to do, and that required a lot of fuel. As I was telling you, my typical breakfast the summer of 1984 was about 3,800 calories every day. And I was all,
that's amazing. Just breakfast.
Yeah, just breakfast.
Yeah,
and then
doing that's amazing.
Yeah, and then I was also having to take a calorie supplement to keep my weight up, because of the amount of work that we were doing.
So that's amazing, and I think it's the kind of thing, again, we just don't we don't hear about. You were actually training for the Olympics. This now really blew my mind, because I didn't know this until today. You were training for the Olympics. You were undergoing that kind of training, and you were in law school at the same time.
Yeah, it took some scheduling. I had a routine, and and people who know me know that I'm very much a creature of habit. So yeah, I would get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, be at the boathouse for workouts at 6. I scheduled all of my classes pretty much between 10 and 3 or 10 and 2. Then I would do my second workout of the day. Then I'd go home and study till 9 o'clock when I went to bed, and got up and did it the next day. One of the benefits was that my law school, Boston University, is right on the Charles River. So only a couple of miles from the boathouse where we were training. So it was easy for me to get to school. And then if you're familiar with the BU Law School, it's this 20 some odd story tower. And so sometimes for my afternoon workout, I had to go no further than the stairwell, and would run the stairs up and down the tower for my workout. They were extremely patient and generous with me at BU. I had to take a leave of absence before the Olympics in '88, and they were very nice about it. I was sort of their pet Olympian, I guess.
Well, thank you for doing all of that, because we all share in that glory. I've done nothing except that I take pride in watching you guys go across that line. So thank you to all of you who do so much to bring us that national pride. You have been in sports from the 70s through to today. You have seen, I'm sure, a lot of change, perhaps maybe not as much change as we might be celebrating and expect. Give us a sense of that arc, from kind of where women started in sports, when you started in sports, and where you think we are today.
Sure. When I was growing up, there were no organize sports for girls until 7th grade in my hometown. And so I started playing basketball and volleyball and varieties of other sports. And when I arrived on campus for my freshman year of college in the fall of 1978, Title IX was 6 years old. But as I think Val alluded, the acceleration was a slow one from the time that Title IX was enacted. So I think a great example of that is that the rowing boathouse at my university had locker rooms and shower facilities for the men, but the women weren't allowed to use them. So so for instance, and in January in Wisconsin, that could be a problem. We would finish our workouts, be soaked with sweat, and I would put 2 or 3 layers of sweats on and then run home to about 1.5 miles to my apartment so that I could shower and not freeze solid. Whereas the guys just walked up a few stairs and they had hot showers in locker rooms. The university was not really receptive to our overtures, and so the upperclassmen arranged a protest and notified the press. And one day we showed up in the offices of the athletic department and used their waiting room as a locker room and changed for practice while our team captain talked to the reporters behind us. And to bring some attention to the fact that we didn't have basic facilities at the boathouse. By my senior year, there was a women's locker room in the basement of a dormitory across the parking lot from the boathouse. And that locker room was used for quite a few years until a new boathouse was built.
Still challenges today? Do you share some of the concerns that we heard from Val a little earlier in the program, and maybe where there are still some zones of inequity, and you obviously see this kind of on an international level, right?
Sure. Well, as Val said, and I think everyone understands, we've come such a long way. There have been such huge steps of progress made since when I started rowing back in the late 70s. You go to my university now, and the new boathouse has locker rooms for the men, for the women, exercise facilities. The university now has a huge student athlete center where both men and women athletes from all the various sports on campus come and have academic support and nutritional support and all kinds of equal type programs that didn't exist before. And we talk about the spectator experience and how important that is. One of the things I love to see when I'm watching sporting events, women's sporting events on television, is to see the little boys in the audience and the young boys cheering for their heroes who are female athletes. I mean, that I think is a profound shift in attitude societally. And I think that it's not an exaggeration to say that without Title IX, I don't believe there's any way that we would be there now. So that being said, there are challenges. I think the two that we talked about earlier are classic examples. Last year at the NCAA basketball tournament, and the disparity between the men's and the women's weight facilities, the women's national team soccer having to only now get equal pay. And that's been a long time coming. I know that Val said that was a wow moment. I kind of thought it was a duh moment, but in any event, it's here now. So there are still a long ways to go. One of the key problems that I still see and is this sort of scapegoating of women's athletics and Title IX. When programs want to, when they cut men's programs and they blame it on Title IX or they blame it on the women's teams. Oh, we have to do this because the women are making us do this. And frankly, that is in my opinion, both dishonest and cowardly on the part of those administrators. And it does everyone a grave disservice. That's something that I would like to see change. And I'm hoping that as time progresses, we will see less and less of that.
Just before we close out here, I have a couple of more questions for you, Chris, but I want to provide the CLE code for everyone who is looking for CLE credit. It's going to be Title IX. What else would it be? The CLE code is Title IX. You can write that on your form and send that to us, and we'll make sure that you get CLE credit for today. So, Chris, what has it meant to you in your life to have achieved this level of sporting success? How do you see this translating into your own life and your career and your choices that you've made throughout your life, so that, here you are, a very, very accomplished woman. You look back on your career. What impact did all of this have?
Oh, it's tremendous in so many different ways. Certainly professionally, I was a litigator when I was actively practicing law, and still am actually. And I, and the confidence and the team orientation and the work ethic that gave me success in athletics transferred directly into a law practice. I was kind of fortunate, as we were saying, I went right from being an elite athlete to being an attorney. I sort of went from one high intensity pursuit into another. And certainly the networking and just the lessons about being fearless, and courage and self-respect and respect for my teammates and respect for my opponents, and all of those lessons that are very difficult to learn outside of sport. I think we see that traditionally young men have learned those lessons because of their participation in sport, and now women are benefiting from those lessons too. And you do look at, there was that study, I think Val referred to it. I believe it said 80% of the women that they surveyed in high management levels in business had participated in organized athletics. And I think that's no coincidence. I think it's clearly causative. And so I just think, I've been so blessed to have been able to engage in athletics and participate in athletics and to continue to participate in athletics and to see how both men's and women's athletics are developing worldwide, and also just locally. There is nothing better than going down to watch a little league baseball game and watch those little kids running around, and know that not only are they having a lot of fun, but they're learning a lot that they don't yet realize. And to know that little girls now have that same opportunity as little boys is really heartening for me.
In the 2 minutes we've got left, you shared with me some great kind of advice that you have for parents parents who want their children involved in sports. And it was almost a little, I don't know if it's counterintuitive, but I think it's interesting to hear it from you. Can you kind of, share that again about, whether or not we should be channeling a young child into one sport, or kind of, letting them sample the sporting world?
Yeah, I think we see a lot here in the United States, this notion that you start a child at a sport at a very young age, and it's sort of an immersion, and they do nothing else. And oftentimes it's a sport that their parents chose, not necessarily the child, the athlete. And I think that more often than not, what happens is you end up with an athlete who is burned out, who doesn't really enjoy what they're doing, certainly doesn't have passion for it. And without that kind of passion, that kind of really obsession, if you will, they're really not going to achieve on a high level, because elite athletes are obsessive. They are completely passionate about what they do. I was really fortunate that I got to do a lot of different sports, and there's been articles in the press recently about the Norwegian model, where the children are really encouraged to try and sample a variety of different kinds of athletic endeavors. And in fact, they don't even keep score until the kids are like 12 or 15 years old. The whole idea being to enjoy the health benefits of sport and participation in sport, and also to enable these young people to identify things that they like. I wandered into rowing and got addicted to it and really, really, really loved it. And that was able to carry me forward because competing in sport is hard. It's a lot of hard work. There's pain, there's sweat, there's blood, there's tears. And, and if you're not really passionate about what you're doing, there's going to come a time when you'll just walk away. And you hate to see people looking back on their athletic careers with anything other than happy memories. And so I'm a big advocate for letting your child play the field. And if they decide to pick something that they want to do, that fires them up, then support them in that.
Well, thank you so much, Chris. Again, congratulations on all your incredible achievements, and that we can say this, that we won our first Olympic gold in rowing in women for the women's rowing team in 1984, and to have you here talking to us about it, I think is just a really great honor for us. So
thank you, Laura. It's a pleasure being here. This is a great program. I really enjoyed it.
Great. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining today, and have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.